The night sky was burning with fire. The small human ship cut through the storm clouds, shaking with every hit of lightning. Inside, the young pilot gripped the controls, his heart pounding faster than the alarms that screamed around him. He had flown through many dangers before, but this storm was not normal. The air tore at his ship like claws. The stars above disappeared, swallowed by a strange red glow. He shouted into his radio, but there was no answer. His signal was gone. He was completely alone. The storm twisted him downward, dragging him to a planet below. He fought to keep control, pulling every lever, pressing every button, but the ship spun like a toy in a child's hand. The last thing he saw through the cracked glass was a vast green world below, covered with thick forests and mountains as tall as the sky. Then everything went black. When he opened his eyes, silence surrounded him. Smoke curled from the wreckage of his ship. His head hurt and his mouth was dry. Slowly, he pulled himself up. The ground beneath him was strange. The grass reached up to his chest and the trees looked impossibly huge, their trunks wider than houses. The air was heavy, filled with a sweet, earthy smell. He realized with a shiver he was not in any normal forest. This was a place built for giants. His heart beat faster. He checked his pockets. No weapons, no tools, only his small survival knife. He took a step forward, the grass brushing against his arms like ropes. Every sound made him freeze. Something moved in the distance. A low rumble like thunder shook the ground. He looked around, his breath quick. The sound grew louder. It was not thunder. It was footsteps. The earth trembled beneath him. Each step was slow, heavy, and powerful. He wanted to run, but his legs refused to move. The tall grass parted and a shadow stretched across him. He raised his head and his blood turned cold. It was not a beast. It was not a monster. It was a woman, but not like any woman he had ever seen. She was enormous, towering above him like a mountain of flesh and silk. Her hair was long and silver, falling around her face like a waterfall. Her eyes were bright, glowing faintly in the dark. She looked down at him with a mixture of curiosity and surprise. The young man stumbled backward, his knife shaking in his hand. The giantess tilted her head as if studying a small insect. She spoke, her voice deep and soft, rolling through the air like distant thunder. He could not understand the words, but the tone made him freeze. It was not anger, it was wonder. She crouched, the ground groaning under her weight. Her massive hand reached toward him. He slashed at the air with his knife, but the blade looked pathetic compared to her hand. She did not pull back. Instead, her fingers curled around him gently, lifting him from the ground. The world tilted. He rose higher and higher until he could see the tops of the giant grass, the endless forest stretching out like a sea. His stomach twisted. She held him in her palm, close to her face, her giant eyes scanning him carefully. The young man struggled, shouting, but his voice was too small. The giantess frowned, then gave a soft smile. She spoke again, slower this time, as if trying to calm him. He could feel the vibration of her words through her skin. For a moment, he stopped fighting. He realized something important. She was not going to kill him, not yet. She was studying him, curious, almost protective. But then another shadow moved behind her. More footsteps shook the ground. He turned his head and saw them. 2 more giantesses taller than the first, their eyes sharp and watchful. They spoke in their strange language, their voices booming across the clearing. The first giantess held him closer to her chest, almost as if shielding him. The young man's heart raced. He was trapped. His ship was destroyed. He was on a planet where even the smallest person was a giant compared to him. He was a prisoner in the hands of creatures that could crush him with a thought, and yet, they didn't. Instead, the first giantess raised him high, showing him to the others. Their eyes widened. Their voices rose in surprise. They had never seen a human before. He was not prey. He was something rare, something they would never let go. The young man's blood ran cold. He understood the truth. He had fallen into a world where escape would not be easy, and his only hope of survival was to play along. For now. The human's world turned into motion again as the giantess carried him through the forest. Her steps shook the ground like drums of war, each one making his stomach twist. He tried to fight, pushing against her fingers, but her grip was firm, gentle yet unbreakable. The tall grass and enormous trees blurred as she moved. He had never felt so small, so powerless. At last the forest opened and the sight before him stole his breath. A village rose in the distance, but not a village for humans. Towering houses stretched upward like castles, built from stone and wood thicker than he had ever seen. Smoke drifted from chimneys as tall as watchtowers. Long bridges of rope and wood connected one massive structure to another. The ground trembled with movement. Dozens, no hundreds of giantesses walked among the homes, each one taller than mountains compared to him. The human froze. His heart pounded so loudly he was afraid they might hear it. The giantess holding him stepped into the village, and heads began to turn. Conversation stopped. The air filled with whispers, low and rumbling like the growl of distant thunder. He felt their eyes on him, dozens of glowing eyes wide with shock and curiosity. They stared at him as if he were a rare jewel, a lost treasure, or perhaps a strange animal dragged in from the wild. Their gazes made his skin crawl. The giantess lifted him higher, showing him to the others. The whispers grew louder. Some of the giantesses laughed, pointing at his small size. Others looked serious, almost angry, their brows furrowed. He could not understand their words, but their tones spoke clearly. Debate, questions, maybe even fear. He struggled again, shouting in his thin, human voice, but no one paid attention. His cries were too small against their thunderous voices. Suddenly, one of the larger giantesses stepped forward. She wore armor made of leather and bone, her shoulders broad, her face sharp and commanding. She barked an order, and the crowd went silent. The human knew instantly. This one was a leader. The armored giantess reached out her hand, demanding the human. The one who had found him hesitated, clutching him tighter to her chest. They argued, their voices rising, shaking the air. He could feel every vibration of their voices running through her body as she held him. At last, with a sigh, she handed him over. The human was passed into the grip of the armored giantess. Her hand was harder, rougher, her grip less kind. She raised him up close to her face, her massive eyes narrowing. He tried to speak. "Let me go!" he shouted. But to her, his voice was nothing but a squeak of sound. She smirked, as if amused. Then she turned and began to walk deeper into the village. The human kicked, but her hand did not loosen. The other giantesses followed, their booming footsteps echoing in his ears. The path led to the largest structure in the village, a towering hall carved into the side of a mountain. The doors alone were taller than skyscrapers. 2 giant warriors pulled them open, and the human was carried inside. The hall was dim, lit by glowing crystals that pulsed with strange light. At the far end sat a throne carved from stone, high and broad. Upon it rested a figure that made the armored giantess bow her head, the queen. She was taller than all the others, her presence filling the room like fire. Her crown of twisted silver gleamed in the crystal light. Her eyes burned with intelligence sharper than blades. When she spoke, the entire hall shook. The armored giantess stepped forward and lifted the human up with both hands, offering him like a prize. The queen leaned forward, her gaze piercing him like a spear. The human's heart thudded painfully in his chest. He wanted to run, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. The queen studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then slowly a smile curved her lips. She spoke words he did not understand, but her tone was clear. Authority, command, ownership. The hall erupted with voices, the giantesses shouting in agreement or protest. The queen raised her hand and all fell silent. Her gaze returned to him. She reached out, her massive fingers brushing his tiny form, and the touch sent chills through his spine. He understood without knowing the language. She had made a decision. He was not free. He was to stay here among them in their village of towering homes and thunderous voices. His life was no longer his own. The queen leaned back, her smile sharp, her eyes glowing. The human realized in that instant, he was no longer just a man who had crashed on a strange planet. He was a possession, a prize, and perhaps a key to something greater. But what? The hall filled again with the low hum of giant voices. The queen raised her hand one last time, sealing his fate. The human closed his eyes, fear tightening his chest. He had stepped into a world far beyond his control, and he knew the truth now. Escape would not be easy. Escape might never be possible. The throne room was silent now. The queen's glowing eyes never left the small human in her warrior's hand. For a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The human could feel the weight of her gaze pressing down on him like a mountain. His chest tightened. He had never felt so exposed, so powerless. Then the queen raised her hand slowly. The armored giantess stepped forward and placed the human into the queen's palm. Her skin was warm, her grip firm yet careful. as if she were holding something fragile. He trembled as her long fingers curled around him, caging him in her hand. She lifted him closer to her face. Her eyes glowed brighter in the crystal light, sharp and intelligent, not wild like an animal's. She spoke in her deep, rolling voice. The sound shook through his bones, but he understood nothing of the language. Yet her tone, calm, commanding, made his blood run cold. The queen was not curious like the first giantess who had found him. She was calculating. She looked at him not as a toy or a pet, but as a piece in some larger plan. The human forced himself to stand tall in her palm. Though his legs shook, he shouted, his small voice breaking, "Let me go! I don't belong here." His words were tiny sounds in the vast chamber, and yet the queen's smile deepened. It was as if she knew exactly what he said, even without understanding his tongue. She turned her head, addressing the hall. Her voice thundered, strong and final. The other giantesses listened with bowed heads, though whispers spread through them like fire. Some agreed, others protested, but none dared to defy her openly. The human looked around, his heart pounding. What had she said? What fate had she given him? The queen rose from her throne, her full height towering above them all. She carried him across the hall, her steps slow and heavy. She stopped at a stone table carved with strange markings, glowing faintly with the same crystal light. She set him down upon it, her hand pulling away. The human staggered but stayed on his feet. He looked up at her, his tiny frame swallowed by her shadow. She placed one finger against the table near him. The ground shook. Her eyes locked on him, her voice low but firm, as if speaking directly to him this time. He didn't know her words, but he understood her meaning. He belonged to her now. The human's throat went dry. He shook his head. No, I won't be your prisoner," he whispered, though his voice was weak even to his own ears. The queen's expression hardened. She spoke again, louder this time. Two armored guards stepped forward, their giant hands resting on weapons carved from bone and stone. He realized what she was saying. If he refused, he would not live long. But then in that moment of fear, he noticed something. The queen's hand rested near the glowing carvings on the table. The energy hummed, the same strange pulse he had seen in the forest crystals. His heart skipped. Could these be the same power sources that might repair his ship? Hope flickered inside him, a dangerous, fragile hope. If he could learn more, if he could survive, maybe escape was possible. But survival meant one thing. He had to obey. The queen leaned closer, her hot breath washing over him. She spoke again, this time softer, almost like a warning. Her eyes narrowed as if daring him to resist. The human clenched his fists, his heart screaming at him to fight. But his mind knew the truth. This was not the moment. Slowly he dropped to one knee, lowering his head. The chamber filled with gasps. The giantesses whispered again, shocked that the small creature had bowed. The queen smiled, satisfied. She straightened, turning to her people, raising her hand in victory. The hall shook with the sound of voices, hundreds of giantesses chanting in their strange tongue. The human stayed still, his head bowed, though inside he was burning. He hated himself for kneeling. But he told himself one thing: this was not surrender. This was survival. The queen's booming voice silenced the hall once more. She lifted him again, holding him high for all to see. Her eyes gleamed as she declared him hers. The human's stomach twisted. He was now more than just a prisoner. He was part of her decree, her plan, her possession, but deep inside he swore to himself this was not the end. He would find a way out. He would not belong to them forever. The queen lowered him to her chest, holding him close as she sat back on her throne. Around him, the giantesses bowed in respect. The human realized something chilling. Her word was law here. Whatever she had decided, none would dare oppose. He was trapped. But in his heart, a spark of defiance remained. The queen's decision had been made. His role was set, and from this moment on, his fight would not just be for freedom, but for survival itself. Days passed, though the human could not count them clearly. Time felt different in the land of giants. He was kept in a tall wooden cage inside the queen's hall, its bars thicker than his arms. From there he watched the giantesses go about their lives, their voices echoing like rolling thunder. He was fed fruits the size of his head, water from bowls as large as basins. He survived, but he was not free. Every time the queen entered, all bowed. She would walk straight to his cage, her eyes fixed on him with the same mix of curiosity and power. Sometimes she spoke softly to him, as if trying to teach him her words. Sometimes she said nothing, only staring at him for long moments before walking away. The human never bowed again. He sat with his back straight, watching, listening, learning. He could not fight them with strength. His only weapon was his mind. From his cage, he noticed things. The strange glowing crystals that lit the throne room were not just decorations. They pulsed with energy, humming with the same rhythm he had felt when the queen placed him on the carved stone table. They reminded him of his ship's power cells. If he could reach them, he might be able to build something, maybe even repair his broken ship. But there was no way to reach them. Not yet. One night, when the torches burned low and most of the giantesses slept, the bars of his cage shifted. A massive hand reached in. His heart stopped, but it was not the queen. It was the kind giantess who had found him in the forest. Her silver hair glowed faintly in the dark. She pressed a finger to her lips, urging silence. She whispered words in her language, soft and gentle, though he could not understand. Still, her tone carried meaning. She was warning him. He leaned closer, listening. She pointed toward the queen's throne, then to him, and shook her head. Her eyes were sad, filled with pity. The message was clear. The queen wanted him for something more, something dangerous. Before he could respond, the sound of heavy steps filled the hall. The giantess pulled back quickly, pretending nothing had happened. The queen entered, her crown glowing in the crystal light. She looked at the cage, at him, then at her loyal subject. The two women exchanged a look, sharp and dangerous. The queen's lips curved into a smile that held no warmth. The human's stomach twisted. He realized something terrible. Even among the giantesses, there were secrets, and not all of them trusted their queen. Later that day, he was taken from the cage. The queen herself carried him outside the hall, through the village, and toward the edge of the forest. The sky above burned orange with sunset, and the air was alive with the sound of drums. Hundreds of giantesses gathered in a circle, chanting, their voices shaking the ground. In the center stood another glowing stone table, larger than the first, surrounded by crystal pillars. The human's blood turned cold. He recognized them at once. These were energy sources. If he could connect them to his ship, escape was possible. The queen lifted him high, her voice booming over the chants. She placed him on the stone altar, the crystals glowing brighter around him. The energy hummed so strongly he could feel it in his bones. The crowd roared, their voices a storm of sound. The queen raised her hands and shouted a command. The human's mind raced. What was happening? Was this a ritual, a test, or something far worse? The queen leaned close, her eyes burning. She spoke words in her deep voice, sharp and commanding. Though he could not understand, the meaning was clear. She was binding him to her people. From this day forward, he was part of their future. The chants grew louder, the crystals glowing until the air itself shimmered. The human gritted his teeth, standing tall despite his fear. If he was to survive, he would have to play along. But deep inside, another plan was forming. He would learn their rituals. He would learn their secrets. And one day, he would turn their power into his escape. The queen smiled, pleased with his show of obedience. She lifted him again, holding him high for all to see. The giantesses cheered, their thunderous voices shaking the ground. To them, he was no longer just a stranger. He was a symbol, but in his heart he swore he would never truly belong. That night, back in his cage, he sat silently, staring at the glowing crystals. He remembered the silver-haired giantess's warning, her sad eyes. He thought of his ship, broken in the forest, waiting for power. The queen believed he was hers. The giantesses believed he was theirs. But he knew the truth. He was already planning his escape. The morning came with the sound of horns. The human woke in his cage, startled by the deep, booming notes that rolled through the village like thunder. The ground trembled with footsteps as the giantesses gathered outside. Something was different. The air itself seemed charged with excitement and danger. The queen entered the hall, her crown shining, her eyes fixed on him. She spoke in her strong, commanding voice, pointing at the cage. The guards obeyed, unlocking it. Massive hands reached in and pulled him out. He kicked, struggled, but it made no difference. The queen's smile was cold, sharp, certain. She carried him into the open square where hundreds of giantesses had gathered. Their chants filled the air, their voices shaking the ground. The human looked around, his heart racing. In the center of the square stood a huge pit of stone, its bottom hidden in shadow. Torches blazed along the edge, their flames licking the sky. The smell of smoke and ash hung heavy. The queen raised him high, showing him to the crowd. Her words thundered across the square. Though he could not understand, the message was clear. Today was a test. Today he would prove himself or die. The guards lowered him into the pit. His boots hit the ground with a soft thud. He looked up, the walls towering above him, torches burning like watchful eyes. The crowd roared. The queen's gaze burned down on him. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was a spectacle. The ground trembled. A gate at the far end of the pit creaked open, heavy chains rattling. From the darkness, something moved. The human's throat tightened. A beast stepped into the light, massive, four-legged, its hide rough as stone. Its jaws opened wide, teeth gleaming like knives. Its eyes glowed the same faint light as the crystals. The crowd cheered louder. The human stumbled back, his tiny knife in hand. Against this monster, the blade was laughable. The beast growled, a low rumble that shook the ground. Then it charged. He ran. His legs pumped, his heart pounded, his breath came fast. The beast's claws tore at the earth behind him. He dove to the side as it lunged, its jaws snapping shut inches from his body. The crowd roared approval. The human scrambled to his feet, dust filling his lungs. He needed a plan. He could not fight it head on. He had to use his size, his speed. He darted between rocks and broken stone, slipping through gaps too small for the creature. The beast roared in frustration, smashing the ground with its claws. Sweat burned his eyes. His chest ached. But then he saw it. One of the torches had fallen near the edge of the pit. Fire. His only chance. He sprinted, the beast on his heels. He grabbed the torch, its heat biting his skin. As the monster lunged, he swung with all his strength. The flame struck its face. The beast shrieked, stumbling back, its glowing eyes blinking. The crowd gasped. For the first time, the giantesses leaned forward, watching him not with laughter but with surprise. The human pressed the attack. He jabbed the torch again and again, driving the beast backward toward the pit wall. The flames licked its hide, smoke rising from its rough skin. With a desperate shove, he rammed the torch into its open jaws. The creature roared one last time, thrashing, then collapsed in the dust. Silence fell. The human stood there, chest heaving, sweat dripping, the torch still in his hand. His knife had been useless. His strength had been nothing. But his mind, his will, had carried him through. Then the silence broke. The crowd erupted into thunderous cheers. Giant fists pounded the air. Their voices roared like storms. For the first time, they did not see him as weak. They saw him as something more. The queen's eyes burned brighter than ever. She stood, her smile sharp, her gaze locked on him. She raised her hand, silencing the crowd. Then she spoke, her words ringing clear and final. The guards lifted him from the pit, carrying him back to the queen. She leaned down, her massive face close to his, her hot breath washing over him. She whispered words in her deep voice, almost soft. Though he did not understand, he could feel the meaning. She was pleased, but that pleased him far less than it frightened him, because he knew the truth. This test had not been for survival alone. It had been for her. He had entertained her, impressed her, proven himself valuable. And now she would never let him go. Back in his cage that night, his body sore, his hands trembling, he stared at the glowing crystals again. The queen thought he was becoming hers. The crowd thought he was their champion. But in his heart, he swore one thing. He had survived the test of fire, and with every trial they threw at him, he would grow stronger, smarter. One day he would not just survive. He would escape. The days after the trial passed like a blur. The human was no longer mocked. Everywhere he went, giant eyes followed him with curiosity and respect. Some looked at him with awe, whispering as if he were a chosen one. Others looked at him with hunger, their smiles sharp, their eyes hungry for more trials, more proof that he was different. But to him, nothing had changed. He was still a prisoner. The queen visited him often now, more than before. She spoke to him in her deep voice, slowly, carefully, as if trying to teach him her words. She would gesture at objects, naming them, waiting for him to repeat. He played along, learning small pieces of their language. He had no choice. To survive, he had to understand. And yet each time her gaze lingered too long, he felt a chill crawl down his spine. Her eyes were not the eyes of a ruler curious about a stranger. They were the eyes of someone who believed she owned him. One evening, as the sun bled red across the sky, the kind giantess, the one with silver hair, came again. She waited until the guards left, then bent low to whisper through the bars of his cage. Her words came fast, her tone urgent. He caught only fragments, but he understood enough. She pointed toward the forest, toward the mountains. His heart leapt. His ship. She had seen it. The next day, while the queen was away in council, the silver-haired giantess returned. She opened the cage with careful hands and slipped him out, hiding him against her chest as she moved quickly through the shadows of the village. His heart pounded with every step. If she was caught, both of them would pay dearly. She carried him beyond the walls, past the giant guards who bowed as she passed. They thought nothing of it. She was trusted. That trust was her shield. The forest closed around them, and at last she set him down. She pointed through the trees. He followed her gaze, and his breath caught. There it was. The broken frame of his ship lay twisted in the clearing, its metal body torn and burned, half buried in the earth. The sight filled him with both relief and despair. Relief because it was still there. Despair because it was broken almost beyond repair. But hope flickered inside him. If the crystals could power the wreck, if he could rebuild even a part of the system, escape might still be possible. The silver-haired giantess touched his shoulder gently, her massive finger trembling. She whispered again, her voice heavy with sorrow. Then she gestured back toward the village. Her meaning was clear. The queen would never allow him to leave. His ship was guarded, watched day and night. If he tried to escape, he would be hunted. The human clenched his fists. He looked back at the wreckage, then at the giantess. "I have to try," he said, though he knew she did not understand. Her eyes softened, but her expression was filled with fear. She shook her head, tears shining. She pressed her finger against her lips again, begging him to stay quiet, to stay hidden. But he could not. That night, back in his cage, he stared at the glowing crystals in the queen's hall. The same energy hummed in his ship, waiting for him. If he could just get close enough, if he could just take them, freedom was possible, and yet his thoughts were not free. He remembered the way the giantess had shielded him when she first found him. He remembered her kindness. He remembered the queen's people, their loneliness, their hunger for something they did not have. He was no fool. He knew the truth now. They wanted him not only as a prize, but as a future. He was the only male they had ever seen. The realization struck like a knife. They would never let him go. Not because he was small, but because he was needed. That night, sleep would not come. He thought of two paths before him. Escape, with all the risks, betrayal, and blood it might cost. Or surrender, giving in to the queen's command, living as one of them, bound forever in a world not his own. The next morning, the queen stood before his cage. She unlocked it herself and lifted him out, her eyes glowing brighter than ever. She spoke slowly, deliberately, and though he did not understand every word, he knew what she was saying. Stay. Belong. Serve. The human's chest tightened. He looked into her glowing eyes, then down at her hand. Her massive fingers curled around him like an unbreakable prison. His ship was out there. His freedom was still possible. But so was his capture, his death, or worse, watching the queen use him for her own designs. The queen's voice thundered, echoing through the hall. The crowd outside cheered as if the decision had already been made. The human's heart pounded. He stood silent, his mind burning with one question. Would he risk everything for freedom? Or would he give in and lose himself forever? The morning sky was dark with storm clouds when the horn sounded again. The human was carried from his cage, not by guards this time, but by the queen herself. Her grip was firm, her stride steady, her eyes glowing with purpose. Around them, the village gathered in silence. No laughter, no whispers, only the sound of drums beating slowly like a heartbeat before war. The human's chest tightened. He knew this was no ordinary day. Something was about to end. The queen carried him to the edge of the village where the forest opened to reveal a wide clearing. And there, under the shadow of the mountains, stood his ship. It had been dragged from the trees, its broken frame surrounded by glowing crystals. The giantesses had rebuilt the area around it, shaping it into something like a shrine. The ship no longer looked like his alone. It belonged to them now. His stomach twisted. His one chance of escape had been brought out into the open. guarded by warriors with spears taller than towers. The queen stopped before the ship and lifted him high so that all could see. Her voice rang out, rolling across the crowd like thunder. Though he did not know every word, the meaning was clear. She was offering him a choice: stay and be theirs, or try to leave and face their wrath. The drums stopped. The silence was crushing. All eyes were on him. The human looked down at his ship. He saw the cracks in its body, the smoke-blackened panels, but also the crystals that pulsed with power. Freedom was right there, glowing, waiting. His heart screamed at him to run, to fight, to take back what was his. But then he looked at the Giantesses, hundreds of them standing shoulder to shoulder, their faces filled with hope, fear, and hunger. They were a people without men, a people whose future was fading. To them he was not just a prisoner. He was salvation, and in the crowd his eyes found her, the silver-haired giantess who had first carried him. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, begging silently. She shook her head, her lips trembling. She did not want him to choose the path the queen demanded. The queen lowered him closer to the ship, her massive finger pointing to the crystals, then to him. Her smile was calm, certain. She believed she already knew his answer. The human's hands shook. His throat burned. He felt the weight of two worlds pressing on him, the stars that called him home, and the giants who would never let him go. For a long moment he did nothing. Then slowly, he raised his head and looked the queen in the eye. The crowd leaned forward, breathless. He stepped toward the ship. His hands brushed the crystal controls, the familiar hum filling his ears. Power surged under his touch, answering him like an old friend. His heart leapt. Freedom was real, within reach. The queen's eyes narrowed. The warriors tensed, their spears ready. The human's mind raced. If he ran, they would chase him. If he fought, he would die. If he stayed, he would be theirs forever. But there was one last choice, a choice they did not expect. He turned from the ship and looked at the silver-haired giantess. He stepped onto the edge of the queen's hand, lifted his voice and shouted with all the strength in his chest, "I am not yours. I am not your slave. But I will not abandon those who showed me kindness." The words were small, but the meaning was clear. His defiance shook the silence like lightning. The queen's smile vanished. Her eyes blazed with fury. She raised her hand high, ready to crush him in anger. The crowd gasped, but the silver-haired giantess stepped forward, her voice ringing out in protest. Another joined her, then another. Soon the crowd was no longer silent. Voices rose, arguing, shouting, breaking into chaos. The queen froze, her hand still raised. For the first time, her power cracked. The human stood tall, trembling but unbroken. He had no army, no weapons, no way home. But he had something else: choice. And with that choice, he had shaken a world. The storm clouds split open above, rain pouring down across the clearing. Lightning lit the sky, thunder roaring louder than the drums. The human closed his eyes, feeling the storm wash over him. He did not know if he would live another day. He did not know if he would ever see the stars again. But one truth burned in his heart. He was no longer just a prisoner. He was no longer just a man lost among giants. He was a spark, a defiance, a voice too small to crush. And whether he escaped to the stars or remained on this world forever, one thing was certain: nothing would ever be the same again.